Hello, class. Today we are doing the second part of the context for the time cycle, and we are going to talk about trading. Our essential questions is, what is the Hopewell interaction sphere? What items did they trade for or collect? What did they use them for? And how do we know that they traveled to get them? And over here on the side, you are looking at one of the maps of a lot of the mounds. All those little dots and squares and whatnot are significant mounds. Then you have a key over here that tells you what part of the Hopewell cultural tradition they belong to. The part that we're focusing on is right up here, where you see Hopewell and Mound City, the Serpent Mound, all of those things that we're going to talk about, as well as Fort Ancient and everything else. So the Hopewell interaction sphere is a collection of communities living in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. Remember, yesterday we saw on the map how they extended from Canada down to the Gulf of Mexico. They were all in contact with each other, and they had similar characteristics. They were characteristics that are close enough that they wouldn't be random coincidental, but very specific characteristics. This whole unit included trade routes between the communities and into distant places. And not only did they bring back items, but they brought back ideas and influences. So here you have our center, the Ohio Hopewell core that we're talking about. And then you can see on the map where certain things are coming from, and we're going to look into that. So important trade goods, they're items that are not local to an area. And for the Hopewell, they focused on raw materials that are used to create tools and artifacts. They traded back some of their things that they made and produced. They traded back also seeds and plant material and things of that nature. Artifacts themselves are items that are created by humans. They're usually historic, and their purpose may or may not be known. Several of the Hopewell artifacts were not quite sure what its function was, but we know it's important because it was created and saved and preserved. On the right here, you see one of the famous Hopewell artifacts. This is the falcon, and it is made up of copper. And copper is the first thing that we're talking about because it was very important to them. Copper is a soft, natural metal, and you can see in the illustration a nugget of copper. They found it in the upper Great Lakes area around Lake Ontario, and they beat it until it's flat. Then you shape it for headdresses and ornaments. Over there on the fellow with the deer hat, the part that's on his head is made of copper, and then real antlers would be attached, or in this case, they're copper antlers. And you're going to be seeing this fellow a lot. Mica is a mineral. It's flaky and translucent. It's a rock. It's shiny. You can kind of peel it like paper almost. It's from here in the Carolinas. It's some of the largest mica deposits in the United States, and specifically the area of spruce pine. Mica is cut into shapes. We're not quite sure what they used them for. They had some sort of ceremonial aspect to them. When we work on the studio project, for a couple of the things that we make, we do have some mica that we are going to use. The hand on the side there is one of the most famous Hopewell artifacts, and it is made out of mica. Obsidian is a glassy volcanic rock, and this obsidian comes from Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. It was used for blades for arrows, spears, and knives. Obsidian is very sharp, when it's worked. And like you see the large obsidian blade that is being held there would have been a spear blade. And this rock that was found here in Ohio was very specifically traced back to the deposit at the Yellowstone National Park and not anywhere else, which probably would have had to be Hawaii. There's not a whole lot of pure obsidian around. They use shell. They use whelk and conch shells, which are marine snails. We have them here, like you see the lightning whelk. Those that they used were from the Gulf of Mexico. So we're talking the Florida, Alabama, Georgia coast, especially in the kind of that upper elbow of Florida around Pensacola area. And they were cut into gorgets. Gorgets are ornaments worn around the neck. If you Google gorget, a lot of times it'll come up with the medieval armor, which was what the knights wore to protect their necks during battle. Native American gorgets tend to be these large discs that would be worn on a band, like a necklace, and then carved. And when you look at this design, again, think about what I said about trade and the potential for them having traded down into parts of Central and South America. There are lots of kind of those design elements in the faces that are reminiscent of Mayan design and Aztec design. Grizzly bear claws and teeth. A lot of hunters were buried with these. The grizzly bears came from the Rocky Mountains. They do not live this side of the Mississippi at all, and they don't live that side of the Mississippi until you get to the Rocky Mountains. And today, they only live in the very upper Rocky Mountains. Grizzly bears are the largest land predator in the continental United States. The largest land predator in the United States would be the polar bear. And how grizzly bear claws and teeth were used were for jewelry, especially for hunters. Over here, underneath Mr. Grizzly Bear, you see that there are some of the teeth, and they are drilled out. From those drill holes, we can tell that they were strung together, and the cord that they used to string them, which was probably made from plants, has decayed, leaving just this collection. Shark teeth. They use both natural and fossilized teeth. The natural teeth mainly go back to that same area of Florida and the Gulf of Mexico where the shells came from. The fossilized teeth, though, a lot of them trace back to the Carolina coast, especially Little River, South Carolina, which is between us and Myrtle Beach. It's right when you cross the North Carolina border to Myrtle Beach. They were used as jewelry. This is a megalodon tooth, ancient shark, and it's been drilled out to be worn. And you can see that it's a decent size. Chert is a type of quartz rock. Most of the chert found in Hopewell was from Mills Creek, Illinois, though there are other chert deposits between there and the Dakotas out to Wyoming. And chert is used to create digging tools and occasional arrowheads. It's a lot more brittle than obsidian, so it would be like kind of a everyday Dollar Tree variety of your arrowhead. It would last a couple times and then it was gone, whereas obsidian would last an extremely long time. How you shape rocks is something called knapping, and you tap on one rock with another rock at certain angles, and that way you create the beveled edge. So when you look at these rocks at the bottom, the top part is a piece of chert. At the bottom, you can see where it's kind of knocked off to create sharp edges. And when they would get dull, then you would just go back and hit at it again. Silver is a precious metal They got it from the northern Great Lakes, Canada, up around the Niagara Falls area, New York area, what's now New York. It was used for jewelry, especially ear spools. There wasn't a lot of silver, and it was more difficult to work with than copper. You can see a silver nugget there below, and atop are the ear spools. Gauged ears were very popular during this time period. They found a lot of ear spools, most of which are copper. And so your ear would be pierced and then stretched, and then this would be inserted and kind of be round on both sides of it. If we flip back a moment to Dear Guy, you can see he's wearing ear spools. His are made of copper, and you can see how large they are. His ear isn't stretched out that whole way. His ear is just stretched out to go around that middle part. And how we know how they traveled to get these items? Well, first of all, normal trading, everyday trading, is I have something. So I take it to a market and I trade it with somebody else for a sandwich. I go home, I eat the sandwich. They take the pottery I made and they travel someplace else, and they trade it to somebody for a horse, and they take the horse and go off, and the person who has the pottery travels somebody else and trades the pottery for whatever. Okay, so it goes from person to person to person, and everybody looks at it and inspects it and makes sure it's good, as you do. And that's what people first thought that Hopewells did, was they went from these little cultural sites to cultural sites and back again, and just kind of like a chain reaction. But that's not what they did. And they didn't find this out until recently, like within the last 20 years. They used isotope tracing, which shows us exact locations of where the materials came from. That's why we know that, oh, this shark tooth came from Little River, this obsidian came from Yellowstone, this silver came from the border of New York and Canada, etc. And then they used pollen examination, palynology, not sure I'm saying that right. And what that is the study of pollen spores. Wherever plants grow, the pollen they make is unique to the area. It's individual, like fingerprints. And they were able to trace the pollen back to areas. And they realized that the original pollen was still on the items. So if you had some obsidian from Yellowstone, the pollen on that obsidian was from Yellowstone. So this means that the object being traded wasn't wrapped up and then unwrapped to be inspected and traded, then wrapped up again and unwrapped again, etc. It was wrapped up once at the source and then trucked all the way back to Ohio. And this happened with all of their things. So the theory is that this was part of a belief system that they did, that people were selected to go on these journeys to bring back these specific precious kind of materials. And down here you can see some assorted pollen spores. And up here you can see the isotope tracing. This is dealing with North Carolina isotopes, and certain things you can tell they come from certain parts of the mountains, whether it's Chewaries or Durham or Cumberland, etc. So your assignment, you are going the distance. So poof, you are a Hopewell trader and you live in Mountain City, Ohio, which on Google Maps you're going to put in as the Hopewell Culture National Historical Park. And pick one of those items that we just talked about. And you're going to use Google Maps. Look back on the slide for the location that the item came from. And you're going to figure out how far you would have to travel in miles from the park to get that material. And also by looking at the maps, what major geographic obstacles would you have to face? So think about the big rivers, mountains, swamps, areas like that. And would you travel mostly by foot or by boat or by both? So let's try it out. So I'm going to go over here to Google Maps. And this is how we work this. It will pull up exactly where we are. So I'm going to put in Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, Ohio. Boom. And this is going to show me how to get there. Okay. So I'm going to go with directions. And my starting point here, I am going to choose Heidi Trask High School. Boom. So for us to go on a field trip to Hopewell, it would be 551 miles. And by car, that would take 8 hours and 35 minutes. Walking, and up here you can change your little icons. So if I am walking, it's probably going to take a lot longer, 185 hours. So that's a really long time. Let's go back to cars. Yes, I'm kind of lazy and I don't walk that well. Okay, so because we are modern people, we don't really have any obstacles. If we were walking, though, we would have to, once we start hitting around this area above Winston-Salem, we run into the Appalachian Mountains, and that would be a huge obstacle to get over. Okay? So now you're going to go someplace else. So what you're going to do is you're going to add your destination. And we're going to put in, I'm going to put in something that is not a choice, just to show you how it works. I'm going to put in where I live in New Mexico. Chama, New Mexico. And now I'm going to get rid of Heidi Trask. Boom. It's recalculating. And to go, if I was a Hopewell trader and I wanted something from Chama, New Mexico, I would have to travel 1,443 miles. Okay? If I was walking, that would take me 465 hours, which is a lot of hours. Let's go back to driving. And if I was going along there as far as natural type obstacles, if you look at the topography, I would be running into some mountains. I have some major rivers to cross, like the Mississippi. And then the plain states of Kansas into this part of Kansas and Colorado, which is more desolate. And then the Rocky Mountains, and I'd have to go up the Rocky Mountains, over the San Juan Mountains, and down into Chama to get my, whatever it is I'd get in Chama. Wool. Okay? So that's what I want you to do. I want you to start at the Hopewell Cultural National Historical Park, and then choose one of those destinations that I talked about. Figure out the distance. You don't have to tell me in walking, just tell me in miles. And then look at the map and say, what are my major obstacles? Okay? Some of them you can see the mountain ranges. You know where the big rivers are, like the Mississippi River. But then when you also think about when you get down along the Gulf Coast, you are probably going to be hitting some swamp areas as well. All right, let's do it. That's it.